Welcome back to The Source on Texas Public Radio. I'm David Martin Davies. It's been over 40 years since the U.S. military left Vietnam, but the war in Vietnam hasn't left many people who were there, veterans who were in country, and they carry the mark of war.
I felt invincible after boot camp because they feed you well, but they work you hard. You know, so after that, man, you feel really powerful. And you feel like that killing machine that they wanted, you know. So I was ready to go and tackle whatever. There was no enemy that could overpower me. Yeah, here I am, 5'7", all the power in the universe.
And that was Eduardo Garza. He is a San Antonio-based poet and a Vietnam War veteran. He is featured in the documentary Mark of War, which looks at Vietnam War. We're also joined by Ricardo Ainslie. He is the director of that documentary Mark of War, psychoanalyst and professor at the University of Texas at Austin. And Ricardo, welcome to The Source.
Thank you.
And Eduardo is here with us in the studio. First I want to talk to Ricardo about your documentary. I mean, I was told, here's a documentary about Vietnam. I'm thinking, okay, I've seen my share of documentaries about Vietnam War. I've seen the Ken Burns. I've seen, all this stuff. Yours is different. It scared me. It really put the fear in me of what it might have been like. I can't imagine what it was like because I didn't actually have to do all that stuff. But I remember as a kid growing up thinking that eventually I would have to grow up and join the other kids who were on my block here in San Antonio who were called up and had to go into Vietnam. I thought it was just one of the things. But this really brought back all the fear and the nightmares and stuff that eventually, of what that war might have been like. Were you really trying to convey that feeling?
I was trying to convey the experience of having been there. Yes. So it's you've touched on something really important, which is because this is not a political film or a historical film. It's really much more of a film about veterans introspecting about these experiences and talking about what it was like. And so I think that's what makes the film very unique, and I'm really grateful to the 7 men who are in the film for their having been so open and honest with me about what they lived, what they saw, what they felt.
Eduardo Garza in the studio with me. Like I said, he's a San Antonio poet, and he is featured in the Mark of War documentary. And Eduardo, could you share one of your poems that would be reflective of what we're talking about?
Certainly. But first, I'd like to give a shout out to all the Vietnam veterans that are still in the world, back in the world, as we might say, and all of those veterans that are still serving in a war zone. It ain't easy being an earthling, but it could be a lot of fun. So let's hope everyone's enjoying their day. And I'll share this poem that I wrote in this past year. And it speaks for itself. Children of men, resting in the shade, arms at the ready, study the tree line, wait for movement, study the desert, the sand dunes in the distance, the sky. They study the lines of the earth, the lines on the back of their hands. Children of women, rest in the shade, weapons at the ready, locked and loaded, study the river's edge, the jungle, the path they are near, the trees, the forest, the lines on the back of their hands. And no one is grumbling. The air is thick. The pungent smell of fear emanates from them. They wait and watch. A lesson in patience, a lesson in waiting. No time to sleep, a tension in the ether, like soup too thick to stir. Leaves continue to fall from the trees and do their twirling, spiraling dance to the end of their fall and lie there with all the other fallen leaves. A time of quiet, soon a time of release, humbled now in the face of inequity. Anger is gone, eyes become vacant, dry, and I am one of them. Children of men, cannon fodder. A glimmer appears in the tree line, a movement, a shining of metal. More time passes. The time to move is now. Safety clicks off, the party is on. Children of men, children of women, fall to the earth, soundlessly bleeding.
Eduardo, you wrote that poem within the last year, but it's been how many years since you were, in the bush? In
44, I don't know.
It sounds like you're still there.
I keep counting the years. I have to remind myself to count back. But, well, once you're there, brother and sisters, you never leave there. It's always with you. It's like the first time you got on a bicycle, you remember that. The first time you do something that's painful or joyful, stays with you.
Editor of The Mark of War is also with us, David Rosenblatt. And David, welcome to The Source. And in putting together the film as the editor, it seems you were weaving, along with the director, Ricardo Ainslie, a narrative based upon all of these oral histories of these experiences. And it is very gripping. And then you bring together the archival footage and the music and all. It just brings you right there. What kind of reaction are you getting from the veterans who this speaks directly to them?
Well, thank you. I would say probably the most impactful experience for me was to hear their responses, the 7 gentlemen that are in our film, to seeing what we had constructed. It was a very long process. We went through hundreds and thousands of hours of footage to find stuff that would really sort of bring out the visual narrative of their oral histories. And when any of them or one of them would reflect back that was really similar, or man, that wasn't this guy, but it really reminded me of them. It was just actually the best review I could ever get on our work. So it was a very emotional process even for me to go in and really study their stories, find what was really the narrative embedded in there, and then figure out a way to kind of distribute it visually to everyone so that everyone could find a way to connect with these gentlemen and their experiences.
And Eduardo Garza, you talk about it in the documentary that you grew up in El Indio, Texas, which is in Maverick County on the border. And so you look out your back door and your house, and there was Mexico right there. There was nothing in between.
Well, it
the
was
two.
about a mile away. You had to walk a distance, but there were no houses back there. There was a line shack for some of the braceros that were working on the ranch, but that wasn't always occupied.
And in the documentary, we start off hearing about the childhood of many of the 7 men who were portrayed in the documentary. Yours, being here in South Texas, and and I see in the documentary a sort of a parallel, how foreignist the land is, how different the land is, but people are people. And I think in the poem that you bring out there, that poem could be told from either side of the firing line.
Well, that's true, and that's exactly right, because war involves 2 enemies or 3 facing each other or dropping bombs on each other or annihilating each other in one way or another, and it's universal. And I'd like to just, if I may, quote Stephen Hawking, that mentioned in an article that I read that one of the things that about humanity that may be determined, or may determine the end of our species, is a trait that we carry, which is aggression. And until we curb our aggressive nature as humans, we will continue to have these wars. And so, thank you.
Yeah. Ricardo, Ainslie, how did you find the 7 individuals that you portrayed in the documentary? I know many of them are from Texas, one's from Louisiana.
Right. Even the one from Louisiana spent a lot of time growing up between East Texas and Louisiana. So all of them have a real strong Texas base to their lives. Two of the men I met over 10 years ago when I was asked to film a group. There was a kind of an experimental group at a VA hospital. A psychologist asked me to do it. He was going to use the video as part of the treatment, this experimental treatment. And I was so really overwhelmed by the stories and by the ways in which these men talked about the legacy of this war in their lives that I decided over the course of those 10 weeks just to do a documentary about them. And so I started interviewing two of them shortly thereafter.
Okay, so Ricardo, we'll hear more about that and the documentary and what the documentary says when we come back from the break. The number to call in is 210-614-8980. The Mark of War documentary, Vietnam Today. It's still with us, 210-614-8980. The Source continues right after this. Welcome back to The Source on Texas Public Radio, 89.1 FM. I'm David Martin Davies, talking about The Mark of War, a documentary that looks at the Vietnam War. And here is another clip with our guest in studio, Eduardo Garza.
This young black man came up and sat with me, and we were talking, and he said, "Man, I know if I get sent out, I know I'm going to die. I know I'm going to buy it. Break my leg. Just jump on my leg." And he was trembling, and he was scared. And all of us were scared. It was practical to be scared.
Why was it practical to be scared, Eduardo?
Well, fear adds an edge to everything, you know. It opens up all of those pores in your body that respond with, because fear brings on adrenaline, and adrenaline gives you power.
But you can only sustain that for so long. One line in the documentary talks about how the men seem to be physically and emotionally used up.
Yeah, man. That's right. But you got to keep on going, whether you got adrenaline or not, you know.
Because you have to survive.
It's about survival.
People were there realizing that any moment could be their last.
Yeah.
And how long can you maintain that? Let's go to Jeffrey on the line, 210-614-8980 if you want to join our conversation. And Jeffrey, hi, welcome to The Source. You're on the air.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your program. I just wanted to say thank you to all the men and women who did serve. I was born at the end of the Vietnam War and everything. My godfather and my father both served in the Vietnam War, and I saw them growing up, how it did affect them, and I just wanted to thank all the men and women.
Jeffrey, thank you for your call. And so, Eduardo, when you hear people tell you that, thank you for serving now, but at the time when you came back, having been in Vietnam was not a popular thing. What kind of reception did you come home to?
Well, I came home to a loving family, thank God, and thank Creator, and but a lot of guys didn't. And I got a job with the VA hospital when I got back. Not when I got back, but later on in life. I was about in 1978, and I put in 23 years with them. And to answer your question, any situation you're going to be in life, it's going to be some difficulties. How you adapt to those difficulties is difficult.
Yeah.
Let's say that. But I had the privilege of having a loving family, but I had a lot of difficulties in adapting because my mindset was totally different from when I left here. Once you've seen men and women and lying on the ground with their body parts torn apart, I mean, that changes you. And then nobody knows that except other veterans. So you guys out there, you know what I'm talking about. You know, you can talk with somebody that understands chess and dominoes, and then you become same knowledge, right? But with other things, it's not that way.
You have to have lived it.
So we all suffered an adjustment, and thank the VA and the curanderos and spiritual advisors that I sought out. I went into the Eastern cultures to learn meditation, transcendental meditation, and I spent a lot of years, and I'm still doing that. I've learned about tantric meditation and other meditations. And I encourage people to seek help in the spiritual realm by sitting with yourself and accepting that this is who you are and what direction do I want to go in now. Stay in the moment.
Ricardo Ainslie, director of the documentary Mark of War. When you really don't dive into the politics of it all, why not? I mean,
Right.
It seems to be these like people wonder, were these men who were in country fighting against Charlie, fighting for their lives in this, the absurdity of it all? Wasn't there ever the question like, why am I here? Why wasn't that a part of this?
Well, the reason that I felt it was important to make a film that wasn't about the politics and the history is that actually those are films that have been done many times, and it did not. There seemed to be something missing from the available films, and that's the stories of the men themselves and their experiences and what they thought about them. And I think one of the things that was powerful for me is that these veterans had these 7 men had a lot of different opinions about the war during the war, and a lot of different opinions about it since coming home. So I think that in our society there's a real spectrum of opinion, but the more important thing was what these men actually lived, what they felt about it, how they saw it in themselves, the mark that this war left in them. And there is one line at the end of the film which I think really cuts to the bone. You know, it's when one of the veterans is at the Vietnam Wall, and he says, you know, these 59,000 people who died for what? And what did they die for? And another veteran, David, this is a beautiful edit that he did, cuts to, in effect, an answer. And he says, whatever else was going on here, we fought for each other. And we died for each other. In so many words, that's what he says. And that's just very powerful. And I think at the end of the day, that's the most important piece, perhaps.
And so, Eduardo, I hear you agreeing with that. That was the driving force of...
Yeah, because I enlisted to go fight communism, you know, and save my country, you know, and serve my country. And I was kind of disappointed because when I got there, the Vietnamese people are just another people, and they're so similar to us. They work the land. They have their political system. They have their lives as humans, and a lot of the GIs that were there had suffered losses, friends, and I can understand that. But we were there to help the South Vietnamese. That was our mission as an army, to help them. But because of the educational, you know, the way we were educated in society with not accepting differences in people and then suffering a loss of a friend to these people. A lot of guys just looked at Vietnamese all as the enemy. I did not. I could not see that they were the enemy. The enemy was this aggressiveness that we have. You know, and now I have a name for it. At that time, I just felt bad. Yeah,
and this, it was also the geopolitical situation that we had at the time, where we were fighting communism, and we were told that this was necessary, that if we didn't win in Vietnam, that the dominoes would continue to fall, and eventually they would be here in the United States. So, Ricardo, Ainslie, as you put together this story, do you think people will be looking at that and saying, this is the consequences of bad leadership? And this is what happens when we have bad leadership or bad geopolitical dynamic.
Well, I think the question for leadership is more that it's incumbent upon them to really think carefully about sending our men and women to war. I don't necessarily take the position that all wars are bad or the product of bad leadership. I assume that there are wars that are not that.
Right, but example, we can talk about that one specifically. We sunk a lot of treasure. We lost a lot of lives. It was a great amount of political capital going into this war that you wonder, what was it about? And then today we wonder about our own leadership and whether or not they value the lives of the veterans.
Well, I think that's what they need to keep their eye on. And in that war in particular, I think there was obviously an explanation for the war that at the end of the day didn't hold up. I mean, the war Vietnam today is run by the Communist Party, and we have very extensive economic relationships with Vietnam, and nothing. They didn't fall in the way that we thought, that we anticipated. But the thing about one of the things I think is really striking about all of these veterans in this film saw a linkage to the men and women who are coming home from war today. That was something that was really striking to me. They all, to a one, saw that the veterans coming home from our current wars are suffering many of the same issues or struggles that they fought, and handling them in the same way that they handled them. Sometimes just drinking too much, sometimes just not being able to.
Okay.
So forth. And so I think one of the messages about the film is actually about the notion that all war, and that's why the film is titled The Mark of War, that all war actually leaves its mark.
All right. Ricardo Ainslie, director of the documentary Mark of War, psychoanalyst, professor at the UT Austin. Also with us, Eduardo Garza, in studio, San Antonio-based poet and actor, Vietnam War veteran, also in Mark of War, the documentary. On the line also is David Rosenblatt, editor of the Mark of War. This is The Source on Texas Public Radio.